is in your name we pray. Amen. As always, I'll start with a question. What are the 4 words that everybody says but seldom likes to hear? How are you doing? We don't always like that question because if we answer honestly, we may say something we don't want to admit. I spent a good portion of this holiday season and the week after. We're kind of coming out of this holidays, D-A-Z-E, this kind of week between Christmas and New Year's where everything's kind of a blur. I spent a lot of time asking people, like, hey, how are you doing? How are you actually doing? How was this year for you? And I got a lot of mixed answers. And to be honest, how people are doing, how the church is doing, well, we need a little TLC at the moment because 2023 was a hard year. It had a lot of blessings. It had a lot of good times included for sure, but guys, it's okay to admit the last year we had was hard. And it's been different than other years I've noticed because every year in some way is a challenging year. But I can tell when I talk to people that we're kind of like this. We're like Snoopy and Woodstock at this moment. We're kind of dazed. We're kind of tired. Maybe we're coming into this year feeling a little bit deflated. Maybe that's how you relate to feeling right now. Especially the last few months. I talked to a lot of people, they've said especially the last few months, it's kind of been an emotional gut punch, a financial gut punch. Because life happens, things get complicated, money gets tight, schedules get packed, and people get frustrated. But in the midst of the chaos and everything that is going on, it's a reminder of why our faith is so valuable. Because we as Christians, we believe ultimately that there's not only a better life ahead, it's not just the sweet by and by up in the sky, but it's also the nasty here and now. That we can experience a portion of that new life here in the present. That for a Christian that we know that nothing that we experience or go through goes unnoticed. Now we may wait for a response from God, but there's a certain peace that exists only for the Christian because we believe that ultimately God is watching oversight the universe, that He's noticing everything that is taking place in His creation. That means every good and bad thing is being observed. And through that observation, God is going to interact and connect with us in the ways that we need in that present moment. And I felt for a couple months now, what we need most of all is a gentle reminder of what God offers. We spent a lot of time in 2023 exploring different ideas of God. Who is God? What does He do? What is His nature? What does He offer? We don't spend a ton of time talking about what God specifically offers. And so this leads us to our source text this morning. I'll give you a moment to join me in Matthew chapter 11. Matthew 11. We're going to break this up into 2 little chunks. We're going to look at the first part of this chapter, and then later on today we're going to look at the back half of this chapter. But these 2 sections really give us a lot of clues, not only into who Jesus and God are, but also what they are willing to offer to us. So starting at verse 1, is an encounter that Jesus has with John the Baptist's followers. It says this: After Jesus had finished instructing His 12 disciples, He went on from there to teach and preach in the towns of Galilee. When John heard in prison what Christ was doing, he sent disciples to ask Him, "Are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you see and hear. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me." As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the desert to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in kings' palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you.'" Like I said, in the church, we try to focus a lot on Jesus' identity, his human identity, his divine identity. But I feel that we should devote a little bit more time into really appreciate not only his identity, but Jesus' abilities. Because learning and understanding Jesus' abilities help us understand Jesus himself. And learning more about Jesus himself will help our minds to continue to see the appeal of following him. So we're looking at this first part of our passage. This is early on in Jesus' ministry. At this point, plenty have heard about Jesus, but few had personally known or had the chance to experience him. And so this chapter puts him into the path of people whose lives would be dramatically changed. And this leads us to our first point this morning. What does Jesus offer to us? He offers confirmation. I want to look back and look at John's question in verse 3, because I feel like it is the centerpiece, the focal point of this chapter. "Are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else?" Now, Jesus, throughout his ministry, he gets a lot of questions. This one I feel is the most influential. Verse 3 is essentially, are you the best thing that is being offered by God, or is something else even better on the way? I think it's a valid question from John. Though the tone of this passage seems that John is asking on his disciples' behalf. Ultimately, this question is important because before you come to faith, this is a question that everyone, you and I, ultimately ask. Because before you invest everything into something, you want to make sure it's the real deal. You do not buy a car without taking it for a test drive. Because we all set out to do something. And ultimately, every one of us, we all sell out to something. Whether it is Jesus or money or your job, every one of us sell ourselves out to something. You cannot live your life not sold out to something. And so if we don't sell out to Jesus, then that just means we're going to sell ourselves to something else. And we as humans, ultimately, we can handle things being real and not working out. We can be okay with something genuine faltering. I, as a Brewers fan, I can handle us losing every year ultimately. I can handle that disappointment. Yes, it's the new year, so Brewers references are back on the table. People can handle things not working out. What we hate hearing, though, is that something that we're invested in was fake. That the thing that we believed in was never real at all. Because that makes us feel cheated. It makes us feel robbed. I know for many of us, this last few months have left us feeling similar. And so when this happens, we go to Jesus and say, ultimately, Jesus, are you really who you say you are? Jesus, you call yourself the bread of life. These last few months, they've been hard. Jesus, are you still the bread of life? Are you the vine? Are you the person that you have claimed to be? Remember who this question is coming from. It's coming from John, Jesus' cousin, the person that in the womb could tell who Jesus was. John's in prison. We find that maybe because of this, he's experiencing some of his own doubt. And that's actually encouraging to us because it shows us that even the most faithful struggle And that's okay. It's part of the process. If John the Baptist can find himself asking this question, then it's only natural for us from time to time to ask as well. Has this past year got you wondering that? Well, let's take a look at Jesus' response. And this leads us to our second point of what Jesus offers. Not only confirmation of who he is, but hope about who he is. So Jesus says, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear. After answering John's question and saying, yes, this is who I am the best that there is, he also gives something to remember. Verses 9 and 10 not only confirm that Jesus is what John believes him to be, but also points to a deeper truth. In verse 10, Jesus says that he is the person about whom these things are written. And he goes on to quote a passage that lays the foreground for the coming of the Holy Spirit. Now, this passage, like a lot of passages in our New Testament, seem on the surface that there's not a lot going on in the moment. But what Jesus is doing is not only telling people who he is as a physical person, but he's making a claim of divinity, which, as we talked about, is a big deal in the ancient world. He's instilling those who believe in him. He's giving them hope. Jesus is saying to John, anything that I claim is real. And because Jesus is real, that means there's a certain level of expectation that we can have from Jesus, that we can expect bigger and better things. Ultimately, we can expect more. That's something that we don't really have the luxury to do today, expect more. Because we look around the world today and find that outside of Jesus, the opposite is true. A life with Jesus is a life of humble expectation, where we can expect bigger and better, where we always have more that we can expect. There's always something brighter on the horizon. But the way our world is now, we're expected to live with less. Lots of us didn't have high expectations from the world, but the world can't even keep up with those. We are in an age where we are expected to live with less. We don't expect much help from our politicians. We have to live with less. Everything from groceries to cable and tools and everyday expenses like utilities are becoming more expensive. We are paying more and receiving less because we live in a world that without Jesus is designed to drain us. It's going to drain us of our money. It's going to drain us of our energy. It's going to drain us of our time, of our sanity. Ultimately, it's going to drain us of our peace. Because the things in the world were never created to be the thing that gives us peace. And so because we know that material things are very rarely things that satisfy, we don't put a lot of stock in them. But it hurts especially more when we have years like we have, that even the small amount of wealth and resources that we can accumulate begin to dwindle. And this last year saw a lot of that. And I'm sure that we're going to see our share this year too. But ultimately, Christians, we have something to expect. That in a world where we're told you're going to get less, we can say, no, I'm expecting something bigger. And unlike things in the world, this is actually a good thing to expect. And this leads us to our last point this morning. Jesus offers healing. This is my favorite picture of Snoopy in Woodstock. I'm a big Snoopy fan. Those of you who have seen my man cave know I have a bunch of Snoopy stuff. This is my favorite. Whenever they hug, I think it's the cutest thing. You can ask Bethany. If this is on a piece of merchandise, I am going to buy it and put it in my office. I have one in my office now. For me, it's not only a cute image, but also, in my opinion, it shows us down to a T what Snoopy and Woodstock mean as characters, because they are embodiments of an idea. Snoopy was created by Charles Schulz. Something about him. He was a devout Christian. He's the person that wrote the Christmas classic that we all watch, the Charlie Brown Christmas. And the focus of his life, the focus of his faith, was on the simplistic joy of loving and following Jesus. Because it's the simple joys that mean the most. Because simple joys can't be bought. They also can't be manufactured. Simple joy is something that cannot be faked. And ultimately, the way he viewed joy was not only a gift from God, but they're gifts for us to have, and they're gifts for us to pass on. Because the source of our joy, the source of our hope, the source of our faith is ultimately Jesus. You can see early on in Charles Schulz's works the heavy Christian influences that take place. Snoopy and Woodstock are essentially vehicles that Schulz uses to try to show the world what God offers. He offers joy. He offers healing. So ultimately, what does Jesus offer? Let's look at the last section of this chapter. Starting at verse 25, it says, "At that time Jesus says, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned, and revealed to them to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." When I read these verses at the end of Matthew 11, do you know the image that I picture? This one. Because love, a very simple kind of love, a hug, the kind of affection that Snoopy and Woodstock are showing, is the same kind of love and healing that we can expect from Jesus. Jesus promises us a lot of things. We're never promised riches. We're never promised power. We're never promised prosperity. But we're promised, first of all, rest. I feel like from this crazy year, we all need some rest. We're also promised healing. I've been going through that process this last couple of weeks. For those of you following my health journey, I have a Dexcom now. It's this glucose monitor that's always testing my blood sugar. I have one in my arm now, but for the first month or so, I had to have one that was inserted into my stomach, and it was quite painful. I couldn't move around a lot and wasn't very mobile. But what I noticed is that I had to switch the spot every week, and when you took off the spot, it left a very nasty bruise. I'm talking like hospital bruise, like it was all purple and gross. I wanted to take a picture and show it on the screen, but Bethany said she didn't want to make everybody leave early. But I had a number of those, and they took a while to heal. Because bruises are often pretty ugly. What do bruises do? They tell the world what you've endured. It shows the world the physical impact that something had on you. But what's great about our bodies is that our bodies are resilient. Our bodies know what the healing process is. And so while the healing process doesn't look great, healing from a bruise doesn't look great, it shows us that there's a way for us to be restored physically. Jesus is, among other things, a giver of rest and a giver of healing. And I think that after this year, some of us may need a little bit of both. We may need a little bit of rest. We may need a little bit of healing, because things happen, life happens, life can be complicated and tough and frustrating. All of us here have some bruises, don't we? Some of these bruises were ones that we got in 2023. Some of these bruises may have been lingering for a very long time. Some of us got these bruises from the world. Some of us got these bruises from the church. Some of us may have got bruises from this church. Jesus offers us the one thing that we truly need, but the one thing we can't get on our own: rest. Verse 29 highlights the depth of Jesus' mentality, because Jesus ultimately isn't super complicated. Faith can be complicated. Theological beliefs, doctrines, a lot of things that we talk about can be complicated. Yes, the Bible is very nuanced. Theological ideas and beliefs can be confusing, but Jesus isn't. When it comes to Jesus, we don't have to wait until we know it all before we come to him. We're not even expected to know it all after we come to Jesus. We don't have to wait until our bruises heal before we come to Jesus. Because if we wait around for the world and for people to heal the bruises that they caused, then we'll always have bruises. We'll be waiting forever, because humans, we're often used as instruments of healing, but we're not the source of healing. Jesus is the source of healing, because Jesus is God, and God gives life. God is the exclusive giver of life. And so if you have bruises today, like I do, Jesus offers us something else. He offers us, ultimately, an invitation. That throughout his ministry, Jesus never had to beg people to come see him. Jesus never had to beg people to follow him. Jesus said, "Come and see." I am inviting you to come check me out. I'm not going to force you to follow me, but I want to give you the opportunity. Because if you take advantage of the opportunity, if you can come and see what I am capable of, my abilities, then that's going to tell you who I am. You're going to realize that I am God. And because I am God, I have a significant amount of power. And I have decided to use that power to restore you, to redeem you, to heal you, and ultimately bring you back to me. It's a message that we need for ourselves. It's a message that we need for other people. That's why it's important for us to embrace this message for our own sake, but also to share it to other people. What is your response to Jesus? Thank you.